Let's talk about rad. Rad as a term is something that's probably important to all of us, anyone who's following me and into cars and of my age range. But I think we should talk a little bit about where it comes from. Obviously, it's an abbreviation of radical. And I think in some ways these days we think of it as just an alternative, a synonym for cool. But it didn't start out like that, right? Like, radical became a sort of familiar term in America in the 60s, talking about these, college campus revolutionaries and or wannabe revolutionaries and the civil rights movement and, people who were pushing against the boundaries of the norm, which is, of course, what it means. To be radical is to, exceed the common understanding of something, whether it's politics, racial position, social position, whatever it is. And so it was in the world as a utilized term, but it wasn't a slang term. It certainly wasn't abbreviated until California, late 70s, early 80s, in the surfing and skateboarding community. And there, they were looking for something that exceeded cool, you know, that like if you know, did a 360 on your skateboard or got air on your surfboard, that you were being radical and that was radical. And then, of course, that was abbreviated to rad. And that term, I remember it, intimately from my own childhood and the feeling of like, uh, this is something that is my generation's expression, slang for like, you know, exceptional. And it's no surprise then that the people of Radwood would, utilizing the structure of Goodwood, another car show, say, let's do a new car show featuring late 20th century cars. What should we call them? Let's call them Rad, and let's call it the Rad era, and then we'll have Radwood. And I liked it. I liked it. That's why I made the Rad Report, was because I thought that was like a fun categorization. I like those cars too. Obviously, they're the cars of my youth. But lately, I've had a hard time wanting to make car content or use that term so much because it turns out that after all this time, after the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the rebirth of the term, we are now finally living in a time that is truly radical. And it feels a little weird to use it as slang, right? When the polarization and the extremity of social conversation has turned like things that would have been way outside of the norm, like not getting vaccinated for the measles or like transitioning pre-puberty kids into the opposing gender, like things that would have just been like so like what, why, don't do that, or that sounds kind of wild, why would you do that? These things have become normalized. I mean, let alone masked, paramilitary forces like kicking out people who might be illegal immigrants. Like there's just a lot going on. And it feels like to utilize rad in a casual way is to actually reject the true radicalism of our era. And I think about this a lot because, this car world has allowed me to come into contact with people who are way outside of my normal social circle, my regional circle, just people I would never encounter normally. And I can see over the course of the last 5 years, I can see those people online becoming more and more expressive of really hateful and angry and radical views. And I think it's so unfortunate because the most beautiful thing about car stuff is that it sort of flattens or just makes unnecessary the political divides that we have, or even like the teams that we're supposed to be on. I can talk to guy from Tennessee about how to put a Volvo front lip back on or whatever. You know, like these are problems that we enjoy solving, and we feel good when we can solve them together. And I have begun to think that the truly radical thing we can do is resist the polarization and actually celebrate the common ground and feel the sense that, like, um, we don't need to constantly be declaring our teams. And also, we don't need to let the people who are doing that convince us that everyone else, that, here in San Francisco, I live in a homeless, encamped socialist hellscape, and I don't need to believe that, people who live in Kentucky or something are all like getting dressed up in Klan outfits every night. Like, there's no need for that. And I think that actually, when you look at the PACE research and you don't look at Facebook, you see a lot of things. 3/4 of parents still want vaccination requirements for every kid that goes to school. And a lot of things are like that. I mean, we all want clean water. We all, we don't want to, you know, live in fear of the air traffic control system being out of date. Basic things. And so I've been thinking about using this account to talk a little bit more about this kind of, you know, the calming center instead of the radical edges. And in a weird way, in a time when dialogue is dominated by polarization, the most radical thing you can do might be to celebrate the overlaps, the places in the Venn diagram where we find common cause. I hope that resonates. Thanks.